Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, A Modern Approach to Incident Management, brought to you by Transposit. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Matt Ransford. Matt Ransford is a Director of Product Management at Transposit. He has an extensive background in product and program management, from Fortune 500 companies to startups, across many verticals spanning technology, CPG, and nonprofits. Before joining Transposit, he most recently led the developer experience platform product team at Hulu. And with that, I will pass it off to Matt.
Thanks for that introduction, Lucy. Hi, my name is Matt Ransford. I am a Director of Product Management at Transposit. And today I would like to spend the next half hour talking to you about a modern approach to incident management. We're going to look at best practices in incident management. We're going to talk about why it is so important to have an incident management process. And then we're going to spend some time near the end looking at how we at Transposit approach this with something that we call human-in-the-loop automation. Really looking forward to it. So let's take a look a little bit deeper into what we'll be covering. We're going to start with one of my favorite books called The Checklist Manifesto, and this is going to set a base for us throughout this conversation because I think that the things that it talks about are really central to what we're trying to do with incident management, not just with our platform at Transposit, but in this space in general, industry-wide. We'll spend some time looking at cost of downtime, that dollar amount that is actually attached to your business when you have incidents. We'll get a bit into the pain of incident management itself, why it's so complex, why it takes so many resources and can be somewhat chaotic. And then we'll spend the back half talking about what incident management looks like with Transposit. And I will give you a demo of what our platform looks like today. So the Checklist Manifesto, this is a fantastic book. Highly recommend it to really anyone who is interested in making things better. This is by a man named Otto Gwande, who is a surgeon in Massachusetts. And he does have a surgical healthcare bent throughout the book. But this idea can be applied to anyone and anything where there are procedures that need to be followed in a highly repeatable way. And the argument that he makes and the science that backs it up shows that a very simple checklist is actually hugely powerful and can be directly tied to more successful outcomes than when checklists are not used. A very, I think, familiar example to use that most people will have familiarity with is the pre-flight checklist. This is something that every pilot uses before they ever taxi to the runway. And the reason why this works so well is because it has given the industry time to refine and refine and refine to the point where there is a very clear, very well-defined checklist that every pilot has to follow before they take off that puts them in the best position possible to conduct the flight. And the argument that Gawande makes is you can use this everywhere. There is an example in the book about placing a central line on patients, which is something that every nurse and doctor knows how to do, but it was found that many different hospitals had hugely varying rates of success or infection or having to reset the line. And it turns out when you have a checklist to follow to do something like that, even if you know how to do it and can do it in your sleep, it really bumps up the likelihood of success. And the reason for that is because of something that he calls errors of ignorance versus errors of ineptitude. So what we don't know versus what we do know but forget to use. Errors of ignorance are very difficult to mitigate because there's things that we don't know. And when you're presented with a situation that's unfamiliar, you're going to use your expertise, you're going to use your experience to work your way through it, but you're sort of on your own in that case. Errors of ineptitude are things that we do know. We may do them in our sleep, but we might forget or we might miss a step. And it's these errors of ineptitude that checklists really mitigate and are beyond proven to increase successful outcomes. So you may be asking, what does this have to do with incident management? Well, this is at the heart, I think, of what makes for a successful incident management process, and that is functionally having a checklist, being able to run through all of the things that need to happen to set up your incident management when an incident comes in, to be able to notify, dispatch, and inform, which is something that we will look at in more detail in a moment. When you are pulling the relevant stakeholders into the conversation, when you are sharing information with everyone to make sure that they are all on the same page, a checklist is the perfect way to do that. When we look at Transposit a little later on, you will see that this is really pretty central to the way that we approach things. We call them run books, but they are functionally checklists. They are all the steps that you need to run through, and we are able to attach those to automation to make that checklist run by itself so that your subject matter experts are ready to go in the right place with all of the right information. So let's take a look at incident management itself, specifically downtime. This is a phrase you may have heard before, that customers pay for uptime, but companies pay for downtime. In a previous life, I worked in streaming, and nowhere is that more true than in streaming. Your customers are paying for that uptime stream. They want to be able to access their programs on demand. And when you have downtime, you pay for that. You pay for that through customers churning out, through losing subs, losing ad revenue. You may have sold ad slots that now you can't provide impressions for, and you have to make good on those. As you can see on this slide, it's estimated that this costs large enterprises about $300,000 per hour. And I might guess that that is actually a little bit low, particularly when you look at many of the modern SaaS platforms like streamers who live and die on their ability to stay up. And all of this is just getting more and more complicated. The cost of downtime is ever more expensive because it is very easy for customers of any type of SaaS product to just cancel and jump to the next one. Incidents take longer to resolve because as you mature and grow, you add ever more microservices, and you end up with a very complicated web of internal communication that can be really difficult to troubleshoot in times of incident. And so how companies have been addressing this in recent years is through SRE, site reliability engineering. Building teams whose specific responsibility is around this, is around making the platform robust and scalable, but also oftentimes handling these sorts of incident management scenarios, and building a lot of in-house custom code, whether it's glue code or your own specialized services for handling these responses and for connecting the systems that you use to support them, because they aren't connected themselves. So it comes with a big cost, is the TLDR on this slide. And you can see this in all sorts of different ways when you don't have a really well-honed incident management process, particularly when it happens in the middle of the night. And again, if I use streaming as an example, if you're a global streamer, it may be the middle of the night for you, but it's prime time for someone somewhere in the world. So your devs and your SREs may be waking up at 2 a.m. to address this, and that time of night is just going to heighten the complexity because everybody is kind of waking themselves out of sleep and trying to find their way through this. Where it gets more complicated is when you have documentation in many different places. Maybe some of it is out of date. Maybe some of it is irrelevant when you think it might be relevant, but turns out not to be. This is more complicated when you have multiple channels for communication. You might have some teams in Slack and some teams in Teams, some teams that use Jira and some teams that use ServiceNow. You might have all sorts of different records of truth. Um, and it can be very difficult to understand which one is the one that trumps the others. And this leads to just making everything worse. You can see these bubbles at the bottom of the slide. It leads to breach SLAs. It leads to stress and burnout. It leads to losing money, ultimately, as the last slide laid out. So let's take a look at what an incident management process should look like. This is a very high level view. This is just a walk through some of the very important milestones that you want to consider in order to start to level up your posture. So on the far left, you've got customers talking about an outage on social media, or maybe they are getting in touch with your customer service and complaining that they can't access the platform. You also are starting to receive alerts from your monitoring platforms. It is very clear that something is happening. So you start by reporting an incident, and then you have to kickstart your process. So to the right in the top of the slide is where you start to dig in to figure out what's the process we have to follow. Does this particular service that's affected, that's alerting, have its own runbooks that we need to follow? But even before that, we need to set up a Zoom bridge, we need a Slack channel, we need to make sure that the structures are in place so that when folks start arriving, they are coming to the same place and they are talking about the same things. So as you do that, you first then look to classify what's happening. You take a look at your analytics. You decide whether this is very severe off the bat or if this is something's wrong, but maybe this is not the worst thing. While you are doing that as well, you work through dispatch, inform, and notify. And this is something that we're going to see in a bit in the platform. This is the process of rallying the troops with dispatch. So who's on call, who needs to be involved here. Inform, which is notifying relevant stakeholders internally who aren't necessarily going to be involved in the incident, but who need to know. So these are your executives largely. And then notify. This is what's your public facing message going to be? Do you have a status page where you tell the public that your service is down? Do you have a way to provide a message for customer support so that when customers start calling in, customer support is saying the same thing to everyone? And then you just iterate on this cycle. You are informing and notifying throughout the whole thing as you uncover more, as you change severity, as you really determine what's happening. And then as you figure that out, you will eventually get to remediation. You're, at a very basic level, restarting servers, or you are rolling back a deployment, whatever it is, you're remediating the problem. And then you finish with post-incident. So this is where you are generating a post-mortem. You are tasking folks with doing a root cause analysis. You are probably filing problem tickets with a number of teams so that they can address the problem holistically with the hopes of never having to experience it again. So when you pull all of that together in a structured way like that, you really put yourself in a much better position to solve these sorts of problems more quickly, which means that you're going to have less churn. You're going to be less jeopardy of breaching SLAs. And you're going to really empower the team to feel like they can handle these sorts of problems. And you do that through codified processes. In Transposit, you will see these are run books where you can have information about what to do as well as actions against APIs so that you can do these things programmatically and automatically. You could automate all of your communications, another thing that we're going to take a look at in the demo. And it also acts as a single source of truth. So when you run all of your incident management from the platform, everyone knows that this is the orchestrator. This is the place where all of the processes are defined and from which all of the activities ultimately flow out. So here you can see how we group these sorts of things into the different categories of intake, classify, engage, remediate, and then finally report, record, and learn. And it's worth taking a look at the iconography a little bit here because what we're trying to demonstrate, and again, we'll see this in the platform when we take a look at the demo, are the areas where things can be fully automated, like pulling in metrics, graphs, logs, and things from telemetry like Datadog, and setting up a bridge, setting up a Jira to track what's happening. All of that can be automated, and that can be waiting for when the first person comes into the conversation to start classifying and mitigating. But then you can see the human in the loop icon here, where we believe that it's very important to have someone actually making decisions. You want the machines to do the things that they are good at doing, and you want your subject matter experts to do the things that they are good at doing. And you want to try to keep the two as separate as possible so that the people can really focus on the things that they know, the things that are not rote, the things that are really key to getting yourselves through an incident. So to bring it all together, before we take a look at the platform, it's very important to think about this again, I think, as a checklist, as something that you define well in advance, that you can iterate on over time as your incident management process matures, and then have it live in a platform that acts as that single source of truth, that knows where all of the communication tools are, that knows where all of the telemetry is, that is able to pull that in automatically to get at that data that machines can get at, but then make it available to the human in the loop when judgments need to be made by someone who understands what's really happening. So with that, let's take a look at our demo. So I am just going to switch tabs here. And this is a look at our platform today. This is Transposit. When you first come into the platform, you see what we call activities, which are something like tickets, but are much better than tickets. But you can think of them as tickets because that's a pretty familiar concept, I think, to most people. But we call them activities because they encompass a whole range of things, and we'll see that in a second. You can also take a look at runbooks. So these are all of the things that, all of the processes that you can codify in order to run in certain instances against certain triggers or be launched by a human. So what we're going to do is we're going to start as though we are having an incident. I am going to pick the web incident activity type, and I am going to say incident with our web service. It's going to be the title of this. We're going to say we got an alert from monitoring, and we think there's something wrong with the web service. The executive summary is a fantastic field. This is one that is specifically tailored for executives. So for the folks who are not going to be involved in the incident, but who need to have constant updates and very brief summaries, you'll see as we go through this, this is pinned in the Slack channels. This is always at the top in the web UI, very easy to access and send off to executives. So what we'll do for the purposes of this demo is we will just copy that same message into the executive summary. For severity, we're going to pick something low because we don't know anything about it yet. We'll assign a commander later. This is happening in production. It is impacting the web service. And right now we are busy investigating. So let's create this activity. And you'll see that we jump right over to the activity view here. We've got our description, we've got our executive summary, and on the right is more information about this activity that you saw us fill in at the start. You might also notice here that in related links now, things are starting to automatically fill in, and this is part of that automation. When this type of activity is created, it triggers a particular type of runbook, and we'll look at that in a second. And it does all sorts of actions at the start here. You can see that we've created a Jira ticket, we've created a Zoom meeting for everyone to join, we have set up a Slack channel, and our web service runs on AWS. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to look and see if there's a problem with AWS. Is the problem external to us first? So right now here you can see that we are fetching the current AWS service status, and we'll get a result back from there about whether or not they are having a problem, which will help us narrow this down. So you can see this has reported green. We're using API Gateway as an example here. This is all part of that classify and triage step that you want to do up front. So if we flip back over to our overview, you can see that we have a Slack channel created as well. So let's click into that and take a look at what our Slack channel looks like. So if I flip over to Slack here, you can see that all of the activity that we just looked at in the web UI is now here in Slack as well. And here you can see how the executive summary is pinned. This is always pinned in the Slack channel, which makes it very easy for folks to access when they need to convey that information out to executives. And all of these URLs are the same as they are on the web UI. So you have this parity between the web UI and Slack. And we think that that's very important because we know that so many teams today spend their lives in Slack and really work there almost exclusively. So let's come back to where we were. Okay, so now we are back in our UI, and we're going to come back to our timeline and look at the runbook that is attached to this activity that is providing all of the actions that we can take. So here you can see when the runbook starts, these are all of the tasks that happen that we saw flow by. And if we look at the runbook itself, you can see how this works. We are creating a Jira ticket. We are sending the URL of that ticket into the related links field of our activity. We're creating a Zoom meeting, and we're getting AWS service status. All of this is drag and drop, as you can see, and you can edit all sorts of different data points when you want to prompt the user to fill them in, or when you want them to happen automatically. So let's come back to our activity and back into our timeline and look at all of the other things that we can do with our runbook. So when we're triaging, we're going to pull some data from CloudWatch. We're going to use the production cluster for the web service. And here we get some information about what is happening in CloudWatch that can help us determine where the problem might be. Then you see we can move on to the coordination phase where we dispatch, inform, and notify. And again, in this sort of process, you want to rally the troops with dispatch, you want to inform your stakeholders, and then you want to notify your customers. So first we're going to dispatch on call. And here we are going to set this up with PagerDuty. So for incident description, we'll say we've noticed a problem with the web service, and we are going to choose the web service, and we're going to run this. And this will create a PagerDuty incident. Here is the link to that, and it's going to page our on-call team. Next, we're going to inform our stakeholders. And just to be clear here, in this demo, we're doing this in 3 different buttons, but in practice, you would want to do this all in one. And you can do this all in one. All of this coordination, you can just hit a button, fill in the fields that you want, and then this will all run automatically. We've broken this out here just to make it a little clearer about what's happening. So here now we're going to inform stakeholders in Slack, and these are the different teams that we want to be aware. So customer success, for example, we're currently investigating an issue with the web service. Please join the Slack channel for updates. Okay. So now when we run this, it is going to alert all of these teams out in Slack. So let's flip back over to Slack and see how that looks in practice. So back over in Slack, if we look at our log here, you can see that all of these channels have been notified. So if I drop into the customer success channel now, I can see that there is an issue with the web service, and here's the channel for more information. So folks from customer success can then jump into this channel and see what's happening. And to date, up to now, I've been showing you how all of these automated actions work. You can continue, you can have human in the loop conversations here where you can say things like, I am looking at the service now. And you can have this conversation back and forth. And what is really fantastic about our platform is this will be reflected in the web UI as well. So any conversation that happens in Slack or here in the web UI, that sounds great. Thanks for looking. Will happen in tandem. So no matter where you are, you won't lose track. So finally, we're going to notify customers. This is a status page action that is going to post about the web application out to our status page. And we are going to call this web service investigation. And now we have notified our customers, and you can see here that this links out to that status page so anyone can go and take a look at it. And we have also added it here to our related links. So now that you have coordinated with everyone, pulled everyone together, you can do remediation. I'm going to show some examples of some very basic actions like scaling your ECS cluster. So here we're going to pick web, and we're going to increase it from 2 to 4 instances. And Transposit is going to take care of that for us with the AWS API. You can do the same thing with restarting an EC2. You can do it with Mongo. You can do it with anything that has an API. And then finally, when we are at the end of our incident, we can generate an incident report. We can do a postmortem. This is going to create a document in Google Drive for us where we can start to gather the information that we have learned during this process. And again, if we look over at Slack, we will see that all of these things have been captured here in the Slack log. Finally, you can run the transposit command in Slack, and you can access all of these same buttons that we saw in the sidebar in the web UI. So say I am in Slack and I decide that actually we need to restart EC2. We can run this. We're going to use instance ID of 23. This is just a demo, keep in mind. And it will run. But you can do this from the UI. You can do this from Slack. You can be wherever your teams are to make it work. So thank you for taking the time with me today to listen to me talk about incident management and see how we solve it with our platform at Transposit. I hope that this has been informative to you, that you've learned a bit, and please do check out the Checklist Manifesto. It is really a fantastic book. And with that, I will hand it back over to D-Zone. Thank you very much.
All right, D-Zone would like to thank Matt for a fantastic presentation. D-Zone would also like to thank Transposit for providing the audience with a fantastic webinar. And lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career.